Thank you very much, Michael. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you this evening. You know, Michael was saying that we know each other very well for the last 16 years, but as a matter of fact, we know each other almost 30 years. But in the beginning, the first years, he was for me more an EU official than anything else. And of course, we have also the honor and the pleasure to have with us Joao Valente Almeida, whom I also know for many years and with whom we served as colleagues at the United Nations. So it's a very, very moving moment for me to be here. And I retired from diplomacy 4 years ago after a career of 34 years. And it was a very, very rich experience, a life experience, if you like, which, by the way, I never thought when I was young that I would end up by being a diplomat. I was more university, academia. I was, I studied law in Greece, and then I spent 10 years in Paris doing postgraduate studies and studying international law and political science and sociology and things like that. And I started working as a research assistant at the university, etc. So I was seeing myself more in the academia, if you like. And then just all of a sudden, it was a whimsical move somehow, I left and I went to Cyprus and I became a diplomat. I have to confess that I have not regretted it. It was okay. I had a very interesting life. I mean, spanning from, young attaché to senior ambassador. And then, the most important moments to answer your question, Michael, probably for me, first was Copenhagen European Council in 2002, where the decision for the accession of Cyprus to the European Union was taken. An issue for which I have dedicated many years of my life. Even before I joined the diplomatic service, I had the chance to meet Jean Monnet in 1978, a few months before he passed away. And he was one of the people that really influenced my way of thinking. And later on, I have done my thesis for my master's in political science on the memoirs of Jean Monnet. So this was really shaping the way I was thinking, not only procedurally, but also these ideas about the organic conditions of peace, the problem which seems intractable in a particular context, and you can address it if you change the context, all those things with Jean Monnet. And you understand that at that time, to talk about the accession of Cyprus to the European Union and divided country with problems, it was unthinkable. Eventually, we managed. And for me, you understand, it was a very important moment in Copenhagen, to the extent that after the decision was announced at the end of the European Council, it was Friday night, very late at night. Don't know if you were there, and we canceled the dinner with the Queen and everything because you were there, Joao. Yes. And so we finished after midnight, and then me and a friend, what we did? We crossed the whole city of Copenhagen walking, and we went there to kiss the Little Mermaid. So this was a very important moment. And then, of course, later on, I was ambassador to the United Nations. And there, it was really, probably the crowning of my career, because I was involved in everything. I was vice president of the General Assembly. I was chairman, of the committee for the enlargement of the Security Council. I was chairman of the meeting of state parties for the law of this. many, many things. And this is where, a parenthesis, small states can play a role. And at the United Nations, this means a lot because when you are there, you are on the same boat. And even if you come from a small country like mine, you can talk almost on equal terms to everybody. And Joao will confirm this, I'm sure. You know, I served as ambassador in other places as well. If you are ambassador of Cyprus in France, you will meet the American ambassador or the Russian or the Chinese only on their National Day reception. And even, you know, in New York, you interact all the time with everybody. So this is why the UN is the forum par excellence for multilateral diplomacy. So, and then after New York, I was permanent representative of Cyprus to the European Union for 3.5 years. And then I was asked to take a leave from diplomacy, and I became Deputy Minister for Europe. And my responsibility was to organize and run the Cyprus presidency of the Council of the European Union on the second semester of 2012. You know, all the observers are saying that they wouldn't expect Cyprus to do well, but they were surprised how good and successful we were. So you understand what it means for the chef d'orchestre that I was. So, and then, you know, after that, I went back to Cyprus. I was for some time Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then I was appointed the chief negotiator for the negotiations to solve the Cyprus problem. I spent 9 years on this position, and then I resigned to run for president. And as Michael was saying, I came close to the extent that my friends call me Mr. Almost. so here we are. But I went also a bit back to teaching, became an adjunct professor in a private university of Cyprus. And another very important moment was when I was elected by the General Assembly of the United Nations as a member of the International Law Commission in 2021, with a mandate that spans until 2027. So now I'm a member of the International Law Commission. We meet in Geneva, normally 12 weeks every year. And now, in order to be up to date, we don't know whether we're going to meet. And we don't know whether we're going to have United Nations in a few months. So this is another story. We can come back to it.
I mean, it's an extraordinary career, and it's very good of you to share some of the insights you gained from it. But let's stay with the United Nations for a moment. I mean, you already partially answered the question I'd like to ask, and that is really that there's some skepticism about the impact of the United Nations. There are those, of course, who have extreme views on the subject, but even without that, comparing it, say, with the European Union, there's often the feeling that the United Nations did not entirely live up to the original expectations after the Second World War of what it might become. But with your experience, your participation, and your observation, if you wanted to summarize for us what you think the main contribution of the UN is in the world today,
Yes.
how would you put it?
I will take don't worry about this. I will. Yes, indeed, you know, the world is never perfect. And the United Nations, you know, it's an organization that was created in the ashes of the Second World War. And it was the concrete expression of the never again, that humanity has not go again through what we have been through with the world wars. The First World War, after which we created the League of Nations, but which was not exactly what we needed. And the United Nations created after the Second World War, which was created around two main concepts. One, the number one concept was the prohibition of use of force in international relations, outlawing the idea of wars and aggressions, etc. And in order to achieve this, the idea was to establish a system of collective security with the UN at the center. And in order to be effective and efficient, the idea was to place at the center a body, an organ, which will have the main responsibility for peace and security to avoid, to prevent the use of threat and the, and aggression, etc. And this body was the Security Council of the United Nations, which was having a peculiarity, a unique feature, which is that it was having permanent and non-permanent members. I'm not going to tell you all the history and how it evolved from 11 members to 15, doesn't matter much. What matters is that the Security Council had and still has 5 permanent members. The 5 permanent members are the winners of the Second World War. This is why countries like Germany or Japan were excluded, if you like. And this is why, as I was saying earlier, I was facilitator for the need for a reform of the Council some years ago in order to change this situation. But the permanent members of the Security Council and the Security Council itself is the only situation and the only body that has the right to use force in international relations in order to prevent, wars and to restore peace and security. For the rest of the international community, only in self-defense you can exert force under Article 51. So the system, you understand, was not easy to operate. Because imagine the Cold War, imagine all the situations where you needed, the United States and the Soviet Union to agree, and imagine also that, for more than 26 years, China was represented by Taiwan. So you understand what the situation was. And eventually, for instance, it was possible, and this is a small anecdote that is very funny. It was possible for the UN to intervene and to decide the intervention in Korea to stop the Korean War, because in 1950, Russia, Soviet Union, was not participating in the work of the Security Council to protest the fact that China was represented by Taiwan. So eventually, the decision was taken to use force in Korea. And all the operation in Korea, coalition of the willing it was at the end of the day, was based on the fact that we interpreted the charter in a way that absence or abstention is not considered a veto. And then when the Soviets realized that what happened, they came back, and it was too late. And this is how the UN were able to intervene in Korea. So we had a lot of situations, including some where, the big powers, United States and Soviet Union, were working together. In 1956, for instance, the operation in the Sinai and the Suez, the British and the French intervened along with Israel, and Soviet Union and United States mandated a force, a peacekeeping force. So, there were a lot of, we don't have time to go through all those things. But overall, the United Nations certainly, has not managed to solve all the problems or to prevent all conflicts. But the United Nations have greatly contributed, and not only in the field of peace and security. In this field, the system evolved differently. What is provided for in the charter and what we do today in terms of peacekeeping is completely different. But more importantly, the UN very early, and in particular since the early 60s, where the membership became almost universal with decolonization, etc., and having all the African, the Caribbean, and the Asian countries joining, the UN started focusing on issues of development, on issues of health, on issues of human rights, and on creating the legal framework which would allow the international community to operate, including what we had in the beginning of the 80s, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is the charter of the oceans, if you like, at the end of the day. In addition to this, a series of specialized agencies were created, part of the system of the United Nations, be it the IMF, the World Bank, World Health Organization, UNESCO, International Telecommunications Union, etc., etc. There are 15 specialized agencies. So, and each one of them, FAO for Food and Agriculture, each one of them making major contributions to building what Jean Monnet was calling, as I was saying earlier, the organic condition of peace.
Yes. And, of course, we'll come back to some of this because there are those, naming no names, who, of course, challenge this tremendous achievement that you have described and call into question its role in the international system. But perhaps before coming to that, you were then ambassador to the EU. And what struck you most and what strikes you now about the difference in the role that a diplomat like yourself can play in the multilateral context of the UN and the much more specific and in some ways more legally positive environment of the European Union?
Yes, the main difference is that the United Nations is an open club, as I was saying earlier, where you cooperate with everyone. European Union is the exact opposite. It's a closed club. The time we were 28, we were the 28, and all the others were outside. So, and the logic is also completely different. It's one thing to promote international cooperation where everybody is equal to the other, at least legally. And it's another thing to be within an international organization of integration, like the European Union, where from the day you join, you have transferred a number of competences to supranational organs, like the Commission. And then slowly, this started, of course, from the beginning, but with the Lisbon Treaty of 2009, you had this co-decision process where you have the Commission who has the legislative initiative, have the Council, have the European Parliament, all three together are deciding about most of the legislation, be it directives, being regulations, being decisions that are implemented by member states. And you understand that there, it's another story. And if you add the European Council, which also became an institutional body under Lisbon and has its own powers and gives guidance mainly to the Council, you understand that we're talking about a very complex system. One of my professors, I don't know if my colleague or Joao, you knew him or you met him, was one of the vice presidents of the European Parliament. Professor Dimitri Tsatsos wrote a book which the title was The European Sympolity, which was giving this idea that you have various sources of power, various sources of legitimacy. The legitimacy of the parliament stemming from the direct election, the legitimacy of the council stemming from the fact that it represents governments, the commission, which has been appointed by governments, but needs the approval of parliament, etc., etc. So it's a completely different system. And not only this, there is also something which, maybe when I was deputy minister and I had this responsibility of interinstitutional relations on behalf of the council, you realize that the stakes in the union are really very high. And they are not high at the United Nations. But to give you an idea, okay, I'm not talking about the UN system in general, but the United Nations per se, and I had the chance, Joao was there, to be the chairman of the fifth committee dealing with budget and administration, etc. We were talking 6 years ago about a budget of 4 billion. Now it's approximately 6 billion. You know what the annual budget of the EU is? 170. So this gives you a sense of measure and shows what are the stakes. It's for us, for all of us, being at the Coreper was like in a board of directors of a big company with very important financial stakes. And a lot of fights about everything, etc. But it's a different responsibility rather than being in an intergovernmental context.
And you need to become an expert on many, many technical areas which are being discussed. We'll open up for questions in a little while, but first I'd just like to ask you about your experience with efforts to resolve the problem of the division of Cyprus and whether there are any lessons to be learned for that for other situations. I mean, on the face of it, Cyprus is a relatively small, multi-communal country, which was invaded by a large neighboring country that continued to control a significant part of the territory of that country. Various efforts were made to resolve the matter, which until this day have not been definitively concluded. And nonetheless, Cyprus was able to become a member of the European Union.
Yes.
Sounds familiar? I mean, obviously, each situation is distinct, but we also have Ukraine, right? It's been invaded. It's still in a state of war de facto. It's a candidate for EU membership. Many people think it's very important to support Ukraine on a path towards EU membership, notwithstanding the fact that part of its territory is occupied by an external hostile power, and that who knows to what extent in the future hostilities might revive or continue. Of course, each situation is distinct, but nonetheless, are there any takeaways from your experience with Cyprus that could be instructive in the present situation?
It's not easy to answer this question, but certainly one needs to learn from what is happening in other situations, because everything is the same and everything is different, and in Cyprus, already before the independence in 1960, we were a British colony. So, and the conditions of decolonization somehow created, the conditions for the collapse that followed with intercommunal strife started in 1964. In 1974, after a coup d'etat fomented by the colonels that were running Greece, Turkey found the excuse to to intervene and to invade and to occupy 30% of the territory. And until today, the island remains divided. So since then, a lot of efforts for the settlement have taken place. The most fundamental, if you like, change was after the invasion in 1977. The Greek Cypriot community accepted the idea of transforming the country into a bicommunal, bizonal federation, so a federal system with two areas, one mainly run by the Greek Cypriots, the other mainly run by the Turkish Cypriots. But in exchange, what the Greek Cypriots wanted were, the withdrawal of troops, the end of the occupation, and the end of also a system of guarantees which was used by Turkey in order to invade. But with this, it was possible to start a process. We have been through many initiatives. I myself, I started being involved in the Cyprus problem in the late 80s already. But then, as I was saying, it was more or less the same time I started believing in this idea of changing the context. So I was one of the main promoters of the idea of accession. We submitted our candidature in 1990. We had a very positive opinion by the Commission in 93, but the opinion was saying, as soon as the prospects of settlement are clear, then you are going to start accession negotiations. So, of course, this was not good enough for us because we wanted, to the contrary, to use the prospect of accession as a catalyst in order to solve the problem. So I spent, along with the then government, I was director of the Office of the Foreign Minister. We spent an incredible amount of time and effort going around in order to persuade the members that we needed to start accession negotiations. If I have 2 minutes, I can tell you a story, Michael, which is very telling. At the end of 94, we had the Essen European Council, which was stating that Cyprus and Malta will be in the next enlargement. And we were with my president and my foreign minister in Budapest, where there was the summit of the OSCE. And Shimon Peres, at the time, foreign minister of Israel, was there. And we had a meeting with him. It was only Michailidis, the minister, myself, and Shimon with one assistant. So, and Michailidis said to him, I would like you to support us in the effort to join the European Union. We have difficulties, etc. And Shimon says, we're going to support you. So we are ready to say thank you, etc. I said, no, don't say thank you. I will not do this for you. I will do this for my country, because the accession of Cyprus to the European Union brings the EU closer to Israel and Israel closer to the EU. So from there, we continued our efforts, but wherever we were going, everybody was telling us, Shimon Peres called, everywhere. Then in January, a month something later, Richard Holbrooke came to Cyprus. And we had a meeting in the office of the foreign minister. And during the meeting, Richard said to us, we are changing the policy of the United States, and the United States are going to publicly support the accession of Cyprus to the European Union, acting as a catalyst for the settlement of the Cyprus problem. Again, Michailidis was trying to say, Richard, I know it's delicate, but can I, when we go out, say something about this? And Richard, who was, I don't know if you met him, was a very funny man. So he said, no, sir, no, over my dead body, you are going to say this because I'm going to announce it myself. So, and we walked out and he announced the change of American policy. And as a result, we managed to have the 6 March 95, the decision that accession negotiations will start 6 months after the end of the Intergovernmental Conference, which eventually happened in March 98, along with the other candidates. And Cyprus performed very well in the negotiations. Michael was there, he can tell you the story. And we ended up in Copenhagen where the decision was taken and we signed the accession treaty in April 2003 and joined in the 1st of May 2004.
Maybe a last question, and that is about the relationship between geopolitics and resources. Also, I don't want to force comparisons between completely different situations, but in the Eastern Mediterranean, starting in 2011, there were these discoveries of offshore natural gas, offshore Cyprus, offshore Israel, and there was a lot of excitement about this. And there was the feeling that these resources could create common interests that could help to overcome some of the conflicts. Experience was somewhat different in practice, and some would even argue that the resources exacerbated some conflicts. Here we are in another situation today, where resources suddenly are like a kind of deus ex machina produced by the United States in particular, with the suggestion that somehow access to Ukraine's hypothetical resources could create incentives to overcome a political problem. Each situation is very distinct, but why were the initial hopes that the discovery of energy could create common interests that would help to overcome this very long-standing political conflict? Why didn't it work out that way? And are there any lessons we can derive from that?
No, I believe that the assessment that this would change the circumstances and the conditions under which you discuss the settlement of political problems was right. And not only for Cyprus until now, the discoveries are significant but not extraordinary. But we had extraordinary discoveries in Israel, maritime areas, and in Egypt with the Zohr, etc. In Cyprus, it's mainly the way the issue was managed. It was mismanaged all over those years. And we are in a situation today, 2025, and we didn't manage to do anything with our own natural resources. And we remain the only country in the European Union which does not use natural gas until today. So it's not the fault of the resources. It's not the fault of the natural gas. It's the fault of the people that were responsible in order to exploit and make good use of this. But probably there are some considerations that have to do with the political problems. There are some issues in the Eastern Mediterranean, not only between Cyprus and Turkey, but between all the players concerning the delimitation of maritime areas. We know what is happening in the Aegean. We know what is happening with Libya, what's happening with Egypt, between Israel and Lebanon, where the miracle was that 3 years ago we managed to have an agreement without each one recognizing the other. There are a lot of issues, but my personal view is that it was possible and it remains possible, and it's really something that we need to take very, very seriously. And I believed myself that this would be the main catalyst for changing the context of the Cyprus problem and going back to this Jean Monnet logic to change the conditions of the problem and building the organic conditions for peace. Really, when I was a presidential candidate, I was, a bit, a lonely night on this, but I was insisting that it is important. Even now, before the settlement of the Cyprus problem, to start exploiting the resources and to provide first, internally in Cyprus, bring our own natural gas to shore for our own needs, which is fundamental because today we are the country that pays the highest price in electricity in Europe. And also give to the Turkish Cypriot community as much as they want, and you understand how important it is for the settlement of the Cyprus problem. And even beyond this, to allow companies to sell natural gas to Turkey for their own needs. Now. And this could be part of a package which would allow, if you like, the implementation of the Ankara Protocol of the European Union and Turkey, ships from Cyprus to go to Turkey, and would allow this, if you like, a new situation where you don't wait to solve your problems in order to start talking, but you do things in order to change the context and address the issues. Because, we came very close to the settlement of the Cyprus problem, for instance, in 2017 in Grand Montana. And the solution eluded us once again. And since then, we are trying very hard to go back to the negotiating table, and we don't manage.
Well, thank you. And of course, natural gas would be considered a transition fuel and would not be an alternative to movement towards renewables, but providing a base load that would also encourage the development of renewables.
Absolutely. In Cyprus, we are using a lot of renewables.
Hydro.
Solar mainly, because we have a lot of sun.
Yeah.
But natural gas could be a very good, energy source for the transitional period.
Yeah.
And bear in mind also that, okay, Europe has the Green Deal and we're going towards greening the economy, but imagine the needs of Egypt, the needs of Turkey, the needs in the area. So, let's say we have at least 10, 15 years where natural gas is very useful. But with the pace we are proceeding in Cyprus, the time will go and we will not be able to do anything.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's open up now. And if you have any questions at all on any of the issues we've touched on or annexed to these issues, please raise them now. If you would just introduce yourself briefly and give us your question. Would you begin, please?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you so much. This was a really interesting and fruitful discussion. My name is Dalia. I'm a first-year Master of Arts in International Relations student here at SAIS. My question relates to the topic of the P5 members in the UN Security Council. I know that there has been some discussion about potentially removing this. How would that look like in your opinion? Do you think that the P5, them having the power to veto resolutions, do you think that is a flawed aspect of the UN Security Council? I would be interested to get your thoughts on that.
As I was saying earlier, I was at a time, almost 18 years ago, the facilitator for the reform of the Security Council. And my main subject was the right of veto. So I was in touch with everybody, and of course the P5. And I can tell you that they were not, and they are not ready to give up the right of veto. They are not ready to accept any regulation of the right of veto, and they are not ready to extend the right of veto to any other potential permanent members. So we were discussing the idea of adding permanent or semi-permanent members, and we had some talk about Germany, about Brazil, about India, about Japan, but veto right was a no-go area. So I don't believe that there is something we can do about this, because even if the French and the British were open, the other three, United States, Russia, and China, are not open on this issue. But, fundamentally, they have, the Chinese have objections against Japan. And the Russians were not 100% against adding some semi or permanent members, as I was saying earlier, but not to extend the right of veto. But then you had a group of states, an important group of states, which formed a group under the name Uniting for Consensus, where you had the competitors of the potential 4 new permanent members: Pakistan because of India, Italy and Spain because of Germany, Mexico because of Brazil, and things like that. So, and they were having, I presided over an overarching process myself with 65 member states, proposing the enlargement with the 4 countries, and also accepting the idea that there would be also an African permanent member, but it was not up to us to decide which country will be. But then this group of Uniting for Consensus, was also gathering an equal number of states. So it's not only the P5, but anyway, even if you manage to have a decision by the General Assembly about enlargement, about changing things, about whatever you want, in order for any amendment of the charter to enter into force, you need ratification by the 2/3 of the members of the United Nations, which must include all permanent 5. So,
Right. There was a question at the back. Welcome to you soon.
Perfect. I'll have to go up. Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Jurek. I'm a first-year MIR student as well. I'm from Germany, and I have a bit of a provocative question. But before that, I want to thank you for coming here, because I do appreciate it. I thought it was very inspirational. We're living in very difficult times right now. We see a real politics shift, basically away from multilateralism that you were describing earlier, and into an era of great power politics again. And my question is, Cyprus being a small state, but in general, like all the small states we have in the European Union, what is the benefit of small member states that you give to the European Union that makes it more difficult to find decisions in, for example, foreign and security policy? Cyprus has had a long history of providing passports to Russian citizens. I believe it ended that policy a few years ago. And you have an ongoing conflict with Turkey, which would be important geopolitically in that region. So is Cyprus willing to give up its, sway, its unanimity power in the council and the decision making? Or what role do you see for small member states in the EU moving forward?
Cyprus is certainly a small state. It's one of the small members of the European Union. But I believe that the way the European Union is shaped, there is space for everybody, provided that you share the values and the principles and you are in favor of European integration. So personally, I'm 100% in favor of further European integration. And I am also of the view that for us, accession to the European Union was by itself fundamental for the future of our country, because belonging to a bigger family under today's conditions is vital. Imagine Cyprus today without the European Union. So, of course, this comes with a lot of responsibilities, which we are trying to assume. You know, several new member states, including Cyprus, for various reasons, were sometimes not good partners. Joao would remember our situation in New York with Hungary, for instance, a few years ago, and what happened with Poland, and things like that all the time. But overall, I believe that there are ways for all of us to be, a constructive partner. The idea you are mentioning about unanimity or qualified majority is something that, of course, there is in debate. And of course, this is important to see how we proceed. And as we move forward, there will be always situations where we need to find the mechanism that, would prevent one member state or a single country to stop the European Union. This is not necessarily something that will go as far as to abolish unanimity on fundamental issues. Of course, there are the institutional issues where, by definition, you need unanimity, etc. But I believe that for the foreseeable future, at least for issues where there is a fundamental stake for one member state, you will have this idea of, having a backstop somewhere. For the rest of the issues, I'm not in favor of unanimity. I don't believe that, my country, Cyprus, should ask for unanimity if we are going to vote about GMOs. I don't believe in this. I only believe in unanimity where there are fundamental stakes. And I believe that we are going a bit in this direction. Now, we need also to bear in mind that until today, after 16 years after the Lisbon Treaty, the conditions are not ripe for a revision of the treaties. We are going through a difficult moment in the European Union. So the most important for us is to consolidate what we have. And when the conditions will be better, then certainly we can talk about a new convention and new intergovernmental conference and change a number of things. But the priority now for all of us should be what we do in the field of peace and security. With the developments with the Trump administration now, the questions for the European Union are becoming very, very crucial, and we need to see how do we deal with those. And, you are German, and we all know that in the European Union, some are more equal than the others. But at the same time, the way the Germans are using their power so far is very collegial, and personally have no objection whatsoever.
Okay, some questions that could be pursued there. Minzal?
Hi, thank you very much for coming here and speaking to us. So I'm Issa, I'm a Master of Arts in European Public Policy student. But my question is, I guess, more related to the US's future role, or lack thereof, in the United Nations. It seems that based on what we're seeing, the US is not interested in engaging with multilateral institutions, and in many ways is being very hostile to it. I know like a lot of critiques of the US is often focused on its conduct in the First Security Council, now the General Assembly, but if the US were to say cut off all of its support for those like specialized agencies and organizations within the UN that do a lot of humanitarian assistance, what do you think that impact would be, and could any other country fill in that role? Thank you.
And before Andreas replies, could I just invite those who are following the discussion online, if you wish, to pose your questions in the Q&A, and I'll call on you.
You know, it's a very difficult situation for the United Nations. And, you know, multilateral diplomacy is under attack, not only by the United States, okay? Let's not fool ourselves. What is happening around is somehow, you know, the collapse of the system which was put in place after the Second World War. And of course, so, you know, the United States is the most major, the biggest contributor. Take financially. The United States were contributing 28% of the budget of the United Nations. During the first presidency of Trump, it went down to 24. Now there are voices, and legislation was even introduced a few days ago for the complete withdrawal of the United States from the United Nations. And today I was reading Elon Musk supporting the idea for this complete withdrawal of the United States from the UN and from NATO. So if you don't have money as an international organization, you understand that there is not much you can do. And, you know, in the UN system, they say it's not only the United States, because in recent years, all the major contributors were trying to play games with this. And it's not that they were paying nothing, but, you know, European countries, members of the European Union, we were paying consistently our contributions in January, February, March. The Russians, the Chinese, the Americans were waiting until the end of December. So you understand that this was affecting the liquidity of the organization. 6 years ago in October, we stopped operating the lifts, the elevators, you know, and we started having, you know, meetings that had to finish. You remember, Joe, at 6 p.m. and, you know, so, and this situation now is being generalized. We have the same approach when we meet in Geneva for 3 months. There are no escalators, no elevators. We need to finish at 6, you know. If we spend even 5 minutes more, there is no interpretation, you know, a lot of trouble. So, but it's not only this, it's more so the voluntary contributions when it comes to programs, be it the World Food Program, be it UNICEF, be it whatever we are doing around the world in order to pursue the, you know, the sustainable development goals in all fields and all areas. If you don't have the major contributors, there is not much you can do and you cannot achieve the goals. And there is also something very important, and you mentioned it, you know, we have a new unilateralism instead of having effective multilateralism. So many countries, biggest players, and mainly the United States under Trump, they don't believe in you know, a multilateral diplomacy. And you see that they are calling for the withdrawal not only from the UN, but also from the World Health Organization. UNESCO is a painful story. You know, there are many, many issues and ideas. And, you know, we risk really to have very, very difficult times ahead of us. Personally, I believe that the European Union has a crucial role to play because in today's world, European Union is the number one proponent of effective multilateralism. We are the main supporters of the UN. And also, when it comes to foreign aid for various issues and programs, etc., the European Union is number one contributor overall. So we need probably to enhance our place and our role. Is our situation in Europe ideal? Far from that. But unfortunately, under the circumstances, we have no choice. We need to go back to the basics and work in order to strengthen our presence and the values and the principles we stand for.
Thanks, Andreas. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Antonio. I'm a second year student here for the Maya International Arts Program at SAS. And I'm really interested in the proposal you had about this deal with natural gas and Northern Cyprus and Turkey.
Yes.
I must say, I'm German like you, and I can't rid myself of the feeling that this sounds very much like Wandel durch Handel. So change through trade.
Yes.
What the Germans have tried with Russia with natural gas, just the other way around.
Yes. Yes.
And
You mean Nord Stream and
Nord
those
Stream and so on and so
Yes.
forth.
Yes.
So, am I wrong?
Yes. Yes, because it's one thing to have a commercial relationship between Germany and Russia, which are not at a state of war. Okay, of course, it was a bit naive to believe that Russia, it's innocuous and you can do whatever you want and you put all your eggs for energy in that basket. But in Cyprus, the situation is different. In Cyprus, what we have is a state of war between Cyprus and Turkey, a situation where Turkey does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus, and where Turkey, have drawn their own lines for maritime delimitation, and of course, reserving the lion's share for themselves. So against any notion of international law of the sea, because the Turks say, we are not party to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and that the UN, when every year we vote the omnibus resolution on the law of the sea, there is one vote against Turkey. One. You have some abstentions here and there, but against only Turkey. So rather than continuing with this spiral, if you like, of negative developments, first, we need to distinguish between the Turkish Cypriot community and Turkey. Turkish Cypriot community are Cypriots. They are on the island. Maybe they are under, the umbrella of Turkey, but they are our fellow citizens. And there is no harm to provide them. Already today, we are providing them when they need with electricity, and it costs a lot, and they have no money to pay. And sometimes we mobilize the European Commission to pay for this, from the money that is allocated for assistance to the Turkish Cypriot community. So the idea of bringing the natural gas of the country on shore and then give to the community as much as they want, it makes a lot of sense. And not only this, it touches them from the control. So this is one dimension. Then for Turkey itself, rather than trying to find natural gas coming from remote areas, from Russia, etc., and all those problematic areas, if we manage to provide them, a pipeline between Cyprus and Turkey, we're talking about 70 kilometers, nothing. For okay, I make a very clear distinction. I'm not talking about Turkey as a transit country for the European Union. I'm talking about their own needs. Where is the harm to provide them with natural gas? Commercially, it makes sense for us because we're going to sell the gas. It makes sense for them because it's more economical as a solution, and it creates the conditions of working together. So it's, I don't see at all the dimension you are mentioning that, you putting your situation in the mouth of the lion, if you like. No, not in the case of Cyprus. And I forgot to mention earlier that, yes, indeed, for some years, there were a lot of Russians in Cyprus, and until today, we still have a Russian community of approximately 50,000 people. But today, this community is more the people that try to escape the Russian regime rather than the friends of Putin. So the links now are very, very weak, if you like, between Cyprus and Russia. But working with people in the whole area, it makes a lot of sense. There is an excellent cooperation between Cyprus and Israel. There is an excellent cooperation between Cyprus and Egypt, between Greece, Cyprus and Israel, and Greece, Cyprus and Egypt. There is no real reason, except of course the settlement of the Cyprus problem, to exclude Turkey from this. But rather than waiting for the settlement in order to start, the settlement will be the crowning of this situation. And it goes on for more than 50 years now. How long we need to wait more?
This was the presidential campaign, though. But, if only they had followed it. And,
Yes.
We have time for one more question. Any moment? Yes, there at the back.
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name's Anima. I'm also a third year MAI art student. So a phrase you used quite often in the conversation was kind of the organic condition of peace.
Yes.
And also as a former diplomat, I kind of wanted to get your opinion on the kind of solution within like diplomacy. So if we look at Gaza right now and the second phase of the negotiations that's happening, it almost looks like diplomacy and dialogue is losing its meaning in the face of conflict. And I was curious to hear, with your experience, do you think that we are losing this ability of diplomacy to communicate across these challenges?
It's not easy to answer this question because, there are good experiences, there are bad experiences. What we all know in international relations and is that it's very easy to destroy. It's very difficult to build. Don't forget that in the Middle East, in the early 90s, we had a phase where a great leap of faith was taken. And it was more or less in the context of creating those organic conditions for peace with Ishaq Rabin and all the things that were done. But eventually, it didn't work because it was competing with the dark forces that were there to destroy, and destroying it easily. So, but today we are in a situation where, we're talking about diplomatic efforts, but those diplomatic efforts are mainly about, addressing what is more urgent, ceasefire, and see if we can start a real negotiation for the future, etc. When we talk about the future, then yes, there we will have to think in a way that will offer prospects for people, and for all Israelis, for all Palestinians, for the region. And it's not easy. It's not up to me or to us to tell them how to do it. But we all understand that this is a big challenge, and we need to find ways to do it, because what are you going to do? Are we going to continue just like that? And is this a solution to decide to remove all Palestinians from Gaza? or to send them to the Sinai or to, I don't know. You know, my fear, very honestly, not only now, before Trump started talking about this, was that we might end up having all the Palestinians gathering in the West Bank, because no country is ready and willing to take them because of very bad experiences of the past. Take Jordan, where almost half of the population, not even more, are of Palestinian origin. But Jordan has been through Black September, 1970. So never again, they would tell you. Egypt, the same with the Muslim brothers, etc. So you understand that there is no way to ask the Palestinians, even voluntarily, to leave, except, as I was saying, if most of them gather in the West Bank. And then what do you do with Gaza, and how do you rebuild? Who is going to live there, and how do you do away with terrorism, with upheaval? You know, it's a complete nonsense to think that you know, there is an easy solution for this. So, but in order for me, really, in order to think about the future, we will need to devise some kind of, as I was saying earlier, of organic conditions for peace. It cannot be simply top down.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for being so generous with your time and also for not shying away from some of the more difficult and sensitive questions. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope we can welcome you again to Bologna in the not too distant future. Just a little word for those of you who are joining us for dinner this evening. We're going to the Trattoria delle Belle Arti. We'll meet there. You can make your own way there. We'll be walking over there, be there in 15, 20 minutes. And we're going to have dinner in the cantina downstairs. Those of you coming, see you there soon. We'll be leaving ourselves from the lobby in 5 or 10 minutes. See you soon.
All the best to everybody. I wish you well in your studies, and probably we'll see each other somewhere. You know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.